talk about their souls being drained away, as it were, how do they circumnavigate that? Are they just, because they've survived 10,000 years since the fall? How are they perpetuated?
I'm glad you asked me that question now.
Well, they don't come out very much, and when they do come out, they come out very quickly. So you get a lot of raids and things. Mainly so that actually they don't spend too much time in the material universe. The webway stops them from draining quite so quickly.
Right.
But what they have found is that.
Well, as we know, they're addicted to sensation. All Eldar are able to experience sensation to a far greater degree than a human or an orc or a Tau or any other creature. That means they can both experience peaks of joy that are just transcendent and amazing, but also the depths of sorrow and despair that would just completely wipe out a human mind. Now, the Eldar became kind of addicted to ever more extreme sensations. Just hearing someone play the harp isn't going to do it after a couple of 100 years. So the Dark Eldar have kind of got to this place where they need that sensation, that input, massive sensory input, to be able to stave off the gnawing hunger. And it got to a point where they found that the suffering and anguish of other people is able to kind of fill that void inside them, basically. So they try and make others suffer in their stead, and they feed off of that suffering, which is quite a dark notion, but we wanted these guys to have this parasitic, vampiric feel, like they're a sort of a cancer in the heart of the universe. It's just like bleeding in all the positivity, and they just feed off of energy and sort of...
Well, yeah, one of the good ones, I think Red did that one originally, was like the souls are like leaking buckets, aren't they, basically? Dripping it out the bottom. So in order to keep the bucket topped up, you have to put more water in the top, and that comes from the emotions and anguish of lesser beings, because as far as they're concerned, everybody's a lesser being.
Quite right, yeah, they've got a massive superiority complex. They see the entire galaxy as just full of prey organisms, basically, like just a big banquet for them to snack on. And
so it's an utterly unrepentant attitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah, completely.
There's not a shadow of remorse or of, even doubt. I think maybe in the back of their minds sometimes the Dark Eldar are like, maybe we're doing this wrong, but they would never admit that, probably not even to themselves. So they just see this as kind of a natural extension of their hedonism, really, of the way that they went before the fall.
They don't see why they should have to stop it, basically.
That's it.
And they think that the Craftwell cousins are fools because they sort of like restrain themselves from all of the emotions and excess that birth slashed. As far as they're concerned, it's like watching a bunch of monks going around their business. No joy, none of the excesses that they would normally get. They don't see why they should have to stop. Why should they? Who tells them to do that? Everybody else is a lesser race or cattle anyway.
Because of this ability to stave off their doom, they're essentially borrowing more and more from but they functionally they become almost immortal because they found a way to escape physical death. One of the things about the Dark Eldar that's quite exciting is that they're so good at the technology of the flesh and of the body, and that they're able to essentially prolong their lifespans indefinitely, short of dying in battle, of course. But they've even managed to find ways around that.
There's even a way around that at the moment, isn't there?
Which I'm sure we will come on to later.
Excellent. I need a new question. I want
Look at the wall, though.
I was about to start looking at my wall of questions.
The wall of questions.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that you mentioned that they raid, and so obviously one of their goals is to leave their sort of secret dimension and attack into real space. What are they hoping to achieve out of that? What's their goal, and how do they accomplish it?
Well, I mean, it's got a couple of things, really, or two main things. Material things, so what you're really talking about there is anything that you would normally think of in terms of like riches, weaponry, but their main thing is getting people. So because that gives them two things. It gives something to sort of fuel the Dark City's industries and stuff, but it also gives you your souls in the end. These are the people who are going to suffer. These are the people that you're eventually going to drink. You're eventually going to take that soul stuff out of them. But Comora's such a huge place, and actually we'll probably get onto that in a bit, that the Dark City needs its fuel, if you like, and its fuel is souls, its fuel is slaves. It's just people. So because you've got to have somebody running the weapon shops and things like that.
That's it.
Right, so
Doing all the dirty work.
that is slaves.
Absolutely.
Yep.
You don't think for a moment that these Dark Eldar, having been at the top of the pile, are actually going to knuckle down and do some hard work and make some weapons themselves. There was actually an exception to that. Let me explain. They bring in slaves by the thousand, by the million. Really, Kamara is constantly teeming with other races that aren't Dark Eldar, which is quite an interesting take actually, because a lot of people think it's just exclusively Dark Eldar, but no, it's full of humans and orcs and Tau, all kinds of alien species in there that have been enslaved.
Right.
And they're consigned to, unless they're really absolute double hard mercenaries, then maybe they might survive. But the weapon shops underneath. Yeah, quite right. 48 hours maybe. In the weapon shops underneath Kamara, which we'll describe later, you've got all these people almost in like weapon cells, and they strive to make more and more splinter rifles and shard carbines and all kinds of crazy esoteric weaponry. And 990 of them will get thrown away, but 10 of them from every 1,000 will be good enough to keep. So instead of having this very organic kind of manufacturing thing like the craft world Eldar, where they actually grow their weapons and they grow their technology, these guys actually are far more artisans, they're more craftsmen, but really high end. So it's kind of like, I see it as being almost like the equivalent of Gromril or Ithalmar in Warhammer. They use the very best alloys and metals that the galaxy has. So they constantly plunder these things. They are essentially piratical. And they would just take anything they want back to Kamara and make the best weapons that the galaxy has ever seen out of them. Some of which are so weird and potent and eldritch that they look like magic to the common. I mean, these guys, they make sort of things like soul traps, which are weird crystal pyramids that can actually suck in an enemy's soul and trap it inside, which is presumably done through some resonant harmonic convergence of wavelengths or something. I don't know. Alien technology. Yeah, exactly.
Wizards did it.
Yeah, wizards did it at the end of the day. So it's given us quite a lot of freedom to make some really crazy sort of weaponry for the Dark Eldar. I've forgotten where we started this. We're talking about slaves and raiding.
That was good.
Yeah, what you wanted from real space.
We were talking about technology and that it's so in advance of what mankind is accustomed to that it does seem supernatural. And that leads nicely on to something I did want to talk about, which is how their bodies are cheating death, because they're making these daring raids into real space and they're stealing the best of the resources. Population centres are being depleted as they're all, I can imagine, being loaded onto the Dark Eldar barges and dragged back screaming to Kamara. But attrition must play a very heavy part on the Dark Eldar warriors. How do they overcome that?
Well, I mean, they don't have, because they don't have the restraint that the craft welders do. I think you're probably aware of the fact that they breed more anyway. It's a pretty rough place, Kamara. There's a lot of it going off. But I mean, what we didn't want to do was we didn't want to say there is one reason why they have survived with this. There's lots of different things like that. I think there's probably a higher birth rate there.
Absolutely.
There's probably more hybrids there. You have the sort of like the draining of somebody else's anguish and soul, which tops up yours. But I mean, that gets more so as you get up the strata. A low-level Dark Eldar who lives in Kamara will get scraps. They'll go to a gladiatorial games, which are done. You know, that's a sort of almost a public anguish soul thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Bread and circuses.
Yeah, right.
Whereas your top-level archons and stuff like that, I mean, what they want is a pile of slaves that have been brought in by their guys, so that they get the pick of this, they get the pick of that, and they get to feed more, because you need more as you get older and you get leakier. You need more on these. And the homunculi have got umpteen different sort of like weird things that they can do physically. They're sort of like science alchemy that they've got. The body modification that can be cosmetic, but it can also be sort of like more extreme than that. It can also help to prolong life. And we'd also put in the fact that they can regrow. They can regrow Dark Eldar from small bits. Is that where you're getting to? Well, it was one of the strands, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We didn't want to do was just go sort of stick in a Deus Ex Machina. They just said, oh, they can regrow things. But that regeneration principle, in terms of the Imperium, it's almost very, very forbidden stuff, isn't it? You wouldn't do that cloning business. But it did give us an extra sort of little thing that, again, you would only be able to do that if you were quite high up the food chain there, because you'd have the money to be able to pay the homunculi. The homunculi don't always want coin; they want something. They might want something really bizarre, proper fairy story stuff. Phil's very keen to sort of like play up a lot of those fairy story things in here.
Dark. It's almost like the resonance of the whole sort of witches and warlocks, and like they might take from you your eyes or your tongue or something as payment, or part of your soul, or your laugh. I don't know. We come up with some really odd sort of storytelling. Basically, the homunculi where it gets very, very strange and fantasy almost.
But for the high ups, for the aristocracy that's still left, there's a lot more options than just sort of like killing somebody and suckling the soul as they go down. There are a lot more options on those, because we wanted to try and get this very complex sort of decadent looking thing where you can probably have like a finger bone or something like that kept with the homunculi just in case you don't make it. But the question is, have you paid them enough for them to be able to do it? Can you guarantee that you're going to come back the same person that you went out? And what's going to be the price?
We came up with this cool idea of essentially the Dark Eldar, a bit like a lizard can regrow or a worm can regrow part of itself. The Dark Eldar have found this technology to get to that point. Essentially, if a Dark Eldar is destroyed in battle, right, Joe Q Warrior here, he's got friends in homunculi, and he gets hit by a last cannon. It's only his hand is left, but that gets taken back by his Cabal mates, because they'd rather their Cabal was strong, thanks very much, and at least they know this guy. So they take his remains back to the homunculi, and they will essentially, if he's got this contract sort of signed in blood, presumably, with the homunculi, then they will regrow him by putting that hand in a weird crystal-fronted coffin sarcophagus thing that's facing down from above the homunculi's torture chambers and oubliettes. And all the angst and horridness that goes on down there, which we shan't go into, we never do, but all of the nastiness that goes on.
Tickling, probably.
Yeah, there's lots of horrible stuff. All the screams and the anguish sort of resonates through these concentric circles of coffins, essentially. And slowly but surely that hand will regrow a bone, which will regrow an arm, which will eventually be clad in muscle and sinew and then skin, until you've got this leering kind of guy, like basically the new warrior born from the hand, that will be rattling in his coffin, and that's his sign that he's ready to come out and cause some more carnage. So we've got this sort of weird immortal vampiric thing going on, which is a good excuse to get around that fact that Camorra is full of murderous swine. I mean, these guys will stab you in the back as soon as they look at you, so how come the society still works? So not only do we have the regrowth thing, we also have, as Jes said, there's a lot more kind of birth rate in Camorra, and they artificially force that by taking, essentially it's almost like test tube baby stuff. They take an embryo and they will grow that in a kind of a weird honeycomb thing that homunculi have, and accelerate the growth until you get a full-grown Dark Eldar after a couple of years.
Well, yeah, we wanted to sort of allude to a lot of these things rather than making this one particular statement about it. Just say, oh, well, this is how they do it, pat, finish. There's lots and lots of things that they do. And really the regrowth thing is generally more for the higher-up guys who can afford to have their flunkies bring something back. Yeah.
Right, so it's just one of the ways in which the Dark Eldar are cheating death and sort of maintaining an artificially high population.
Well, they're Dark Eldar, they cheat. Yeah. That's what they do.
They've got loads of ways around all of the common or garden problems, because they figured this all out millennia ago. Humans are still like, oh, what shall I do? But the Dark Eldar have an answer for everything.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you think that's dangerous? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
that sort of stuff.
So they, as a result, they have this kind of. I like the idea of a raiding fleet zooming out of a webway portal onto an Imperial world, and the Imperial Guard are there repelling them with, huge lines of last guns and roaring battle tanks, and it's all kicking off. The Dark Eldar are running rings around the Imperial Guard, but there's still a massive toll being taken. And eventually, once the Dark Eldar have got their requisite amounts of prisoners or slaves, they leg it straight back into the webway, taking their dead with them. So there's nothing left. There's no kind of remnants. Because if you get those remnants back to the homunculi in time, then you can regrow them, or if you get a call in a favour to make sure that they can come back to life.
Or if you don't, you can always use them for something. That's
absolutely.
It's all it's all rendered down. Once they're dead, does it really make any difference? Does it?
They're quite callous about it.
They're very callous about it.
You end up with this feeling of kind of the raid happening at midnight, and then they have to get back by dawn.
Sure.
It's another fairy tale reference.
Exactly. We tried to hint at a lot of old story archetypes with these guys. They are like the evil changelings that will replace steal people and replace them with one of their own. They're the witches in the woods, or the boogeymen, or the serial killers. They're all of these horrible archetypes rolled into one, and given really cool technology.
Yeah, quite.